We at the Everything Red Deer podcast acknowledge that it is recorded on Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 land, as well as on a historic gathering place of the Métis. We thank the elders and knowledge keepers who remain with us today and those who've gone before us. This acknowledgement is small, but meant nonetheless as an act of reconciliation and gratitude.
Local, credible, now. You're listening to the Everything Red Deer podcast, powered by RD News Now. We talk to the movers, shakers, and newsmakers around Red Deer and Central Alberta, then bring those interviews to you. And now, here's your host, Josh Hall.
Welcome one, welcome all back to the Everything Red Deer podcast. Thanks for joining me on this second day of spring 2025. It's March 21st. There are a couple of very noteworthy observances happening today. First off, today is World Down Syndrome Day. And one way you can show support this year and in the future is by wearing mismatched socks. Some folks also wear an extra sock, and this is to represent the extra chromosome and to celebrate differences. Some people also wear the same set of mismatched socks to point out that we are more alike than different. This is an important initiative for the Red Deer Rebels, who wore mismatched socks at practice today. They sometimes do it during a game, depending on which day the observance falls in the year. You can check out some pictures of what they did on the Red Deer Rebels social media accounts. Today is also the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And over in North Red Deer today, organizers put on the 10th Annual Community Power of One Conference. Well done to all the community agencies involved, in particular the Red Deer Local Immigration Partnership, or RD-LIP. Next Friday on the podcast, my guest will be from that event's organizing team, and we may have some more to add on to that subject as well. Today, though, we're circling back to mental health, something we've talked about before on the Everything Red Deer podcast. Specifically today, we're talking about those who live and work in agriculture. I will tee up that interview in just a few moments. First, let's get to our weekly segment. It's In Case You Missed It. This is In Case You Missed It, where we run down some of the top stories at rdnewsnow.com from the past week. We start last Friday at the brand spanking new Red Deer Justice Center, where a lawyer argued for an injunction against the March 31st closure of the Red Deer overdose prevention site. The government of Alberta was also represented to argue against an injunction. In that case, we still await the judge's decision, which is anticipated before the scheduled March 31st closure. In Penhold, the Community Leaders Society is looking to raise funds for a new dog park. The group is currently hosting public information meetings the first Tuesday of every month, 7 p.m. at the Penhold Multiplex. Well, the federal election is likely to be called this Sunday, and two parties have named their candidates for the new redrawn constituency of Red Deer. For the People's Party, it will be local financial planner Kyla Court, and for the Conservative Party of Canada, it will be Burton Bailey, who has for several years been an executive assistant to Red Deer North MLA and Health Minister Adriana LaGrange. Meantime, a Red Deer company is helping to shore up Arctic defense through a multi-million-dollar contract. That deal for Technologics is worth just shy of $7 million and will see the Red Deer company carry out Phase 4 of the Polar Over-the-Horizon Radar project, which is part of modernizing NORAD. That is most impressive. Out in Lacombe, police responded to a hold and secure incident at a Cole Lacombe Junior High School where a person who didn't go to that school had a knife and damaged a door. No one was hurt and charges have since been laid. And RD News Now got a close-up look at RCMP body-worn cameras. You may remember we spoke with Sylvan Lake RCMP on the podcast about the rollout of these a few weeks ago. Now Red Deer RCMP have them, and you can learn even more about them at our website. As well, the Medicine River Wildlife Center has a campaign on now to educate people about covering your vent. This is to prevent small birds from getting in there, which is a hazard to them and to you, as things like nests in exterior vents can be a fire hazard. On the sports scene, nominations are now open for the 2025 Red Deer Rising Sports Star Awards. These are for young athletes 12 and under, and the deadline to nominate is noon on April 21st. More at reddeer.ca/rising star. As well, the Red Deer Polytechnic Kings can clinch the ACAC Hockey Championship tonight at the Gary W. Harris Canada Game Centre. Game time is 7 p.m. against Briarcrest, whom RDP leads 2-1 in their best-of-5 ACAC final. If necessary, hopefully not, no offense to Briarcrest, Game 5 is Saturday night, same place, but at 5 p.m. for all the marbles. Lastly, I'm not sure I've ever seen our community events calendar so jam-packed. There's a ton of fun stuff coming up in Central Alberta, from theater to environmental education opportunities to music, to the World's Religions Conference at RDP. There's the Food and Beverage Expo at Westerner Park, Steps for Life, the Sun Run, a golf tournament for Ronald McDonald House, Run Hike for Hospice, Rock the Track this August in Rimbey with, among others, Theory of a Dead Man. Are you kidding me? And there's also the Harvest Run in September, which you can find out more about on our events calendar. All of these events, all of these stories I just talked about are at rdnewsnow.com. That was In Case You Missed It. All right, so you're about to hear a great interview between RD News Now's Ashley Lavallee Koenig and Shay Burnett, a counselor with Counseling Alberta, part of the Ag No program. Ag No, that's AGKNOW, is a provincial network of sorts of counselors who are driven by their passion for the well-being of farmers. According to Counseling Alberta, a troubling 57% of farmers experience anxiety, while 45% face high stress and 35% experience depression. Despite the need, the organization says 40% of farmers feel uneasy about asking for help due to stigma and lack of resources. They also note that rural males are twice as likely to die by suicide than males who live in urban areas. It's a sad reality that this group of professionals really wants to change. But the situation for farmers has only become harder as both climate change and trade uncertainty wreak havoc. This week, as addressed by the Grain Growers of Canada, China is putting a 100% tariff on Canadian canola oil, canola meal, and peas. This is devastating news that comes as the United States government is already causing their own chaos with their tariffs across many other sectors. So what it amounts to for farmers, ranchers, and others in ag is mounting pressure, and that is the focus of this week's interview, which is up next.
So there's a lot of different factors going on right now. There's tariffs, there's climate change, mental health wise. Why are these such big factors in terms of causing such consternation for farmers and other people in the agriculture sector right now?
Well, I think all of our farmers, whether it's directly or indirectly, we're now in an international economic climate. So whether it's supplies or selling crops, everything's influenced right now internationally. And I think it'd be particularly stressful for farmers because it's out of their control. And you could be growing a great crop, and who knows what you're going to be able to get for it, what the markets are, and not to mention the cost of machinery that's already going up. It's already high to start with, so that's an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of factors there that it's hard to have any kind of real influence over, like you mentioned.
The thing about uncertainty is it causes anxiety, and farmers know this. They work with the weather. Yeah, they work with everything under the sun. It's constant uncertainty. And this just adds one more level of it.
Taking into consideration that uncertainty, that building anxiety, have you seen an uptick in your clients in that sector?
I haven't particularly, because I think farmers are sometimes the last people to go and receive help. It's generally a fairly independent, kind of independent pride culture. And so I think that's part of the big movement now, why we want to have interviews, why there's programs like Ag No and Counseling Alberta put on by the Calgary or the government of Alberta to start bridging more awareness that it is okay to talk about these things. There are services to support.
So would you say that within that industry up to this point there's been a bit of a stigma around farmers reaching out for help like that?
Yeah, for a number of reasons. I think generally people dependent on the people in the community. That's more trustworthy. I think also people in rural have had less access to services than people in urban, so they're not as familiar with them. And I think also what we do have seen a rise in is suicide in farmers. And so that's why there's a movement across Canada to start bridging that gap, start training therapists to be more involved, or getting people who come from rural countries that are therapists, or rural parts of the province that are therapists, to be fine-tuning their services or reaching out.
Well, given how serious of an issue it has been increasingly becoming, and how much of a challenge it can be for some farmers to reach out for that help, what would your advice be to people that are in that sector and facing mental health issues?
I think one, recognize that a lot of the things that you're dealing with are for just because they're normal, like constantly trying to work with weather, and either having like a few years back where it was so dry, people started harvesting in early August, just recognizing that all these difficulties of being isolated, working with heavy chemicals, physical health challenges, that they are a valid toll. That they are actually, just because it's normal doesn't mean that it's not, it's not a heavy burden or stress to be carrying around. And the solutions are, I think, some of the old solutions, like actually, as a guy, I can say growing up a bit on a farm, a bit in small towns, that I knew how to talk about work. I did not know how to talk about emotions. And that led, that was problematic in my life. And so I think that's why I'm a bit passionate about it. But I think also what we're seeing now is more and more men, and women also, but more men are starting to, it's safe to talk about, or it's, people do want to talk about the difficulties, but we don't necessarily know how to start that conversation. So I think part of it is just within local communities, opening that up. Saying, hey, this is rough. Are you having a rough time right now? Or what's going on? Just making, even if we don't know how to carry on a conversation, starting the conversation often is a really nice bridge to like people knowing they're not alone with what they're carrying. And also, I have a bit of a bias being a therapist for mental health, that I think it's perfectly okay to, like, one of the programs, Counseling Alberta, the government put $7 million in to help rural Albertans, and that is to subsidize counseling sessions. And we recognize sometimes people are going to have a counseling session while they're driving a tractor, or so forth. So we're open to that and being able to fit in where people can step in.
Just to kind of expand or clarify on that a little bit, is there a network of counselors in Alberta who are more specifically equipped to deal with farmers and people in the ag sector?
Well, I think often counselors in rural or more smaller centers are, just by nature of people that they're surrounded by, or they're often people from rural are more attracted to live in the rural. And so you'll find counselors in that area. Ag No is a program that's got going, and they're working with that. Counseling Alberta is another program that we've been being trained, like going through different people in agriculture places, training the counselors. And there's people like me that work with Counseling Alberta that come from a farm. So there's an interesting thing, like farmers do have like pretty particular, and ranchers. I want to make sure there's a differentiation there often. But there are a lot of things that are particularly stressful, like transitioning, how farms are transitioning from one generation to another, trying to find help during harvests, like long work hours. That's sometimes interesting for, I think, people in the city don't recognize. Well, you got to work when you got to work. Like there's the weather dictates it or the need dictates it. So those things are maybe particular to farmers and many others, but the resulting anxiety, relationship troubles, family dynamic troubles, addiction, drinking too much, those things are actually normal across cultures. So I think therapists do have the skills to deal with the results, and it's good to also have the knowledge of where people are coming from, to just recognize the normality of the difficulties where farmers are coming from.
There's some people who maybe are a little bit more experienced from their personal lives to work in that sector, but otherwise, there's some common themes that anybody can relate to in terms of that anxiety and things like that. So another thing that we just wanted to touch on while we have you here is that a report came out this week from the Grain Growers of Canada, and it talked about the, quote, mounting pressure on farmers with respect to tariffs and what some people are calling a trade crisis, right? So if we're talking about mental health, how does that word pressure really kind of encapsulate what farmers are going through right now?
From all sides, and just looking for a break. There's the hope that you can have 7 out of 10 years be good years. And then some people, like the pressures are coming from droughts. Some areas of the province where droughts have been going on for a lot longer. And what's the bank? Where are you at with bank payments? Like so much is on the line. So, there can be great profits and glory and getting things in, and there can be all the distress of it not working through and that being repeated year after year. And I think it shows on families, and it's often some of the easiest kind of common releases are to have a beer, watch some TV, go to the lake, do something relaxing. But like these are ongoing pressures, ongoing. My understanding in farming community, the process for dealing with life was work harder, get things done, take care of everything. And I think that generationally, that's why it's such a strong, people in general who they love the land they're working with, they want to take care of it and they want it to be generational. But I guess, that all that pressure of international pressure historically wasn't so much there. And I think, it's just mounting pressure. I don't know if I can elaborate more than yes, there's mounting pressure going on.
Thanks for your thoughts on this so far, Shay. Was there anything else that you wanted to add at this time?
I think it's okay to give yourself a break. And it's not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of kind of courage and wisdom to say, all right, there's been a lot on my plate, and it's actually all right to just give somebody a call and have a chat. It's the old, just leaning on the fence and having a conversation and sorting out ideas, sorting what's stressing a person out and being able to talk about it and see if somebody else has some ideas or strategies to help out. Once again, I have a bit of bias for counseling, and I think it's about adding tools to your toolbox and letting your load be helped by letting somebody else help carry some of your load by having a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good way to wrap things up, I think, and that's a good message for anyone out there, but especially somebody in the agriculture industry who's struggling to hear. So thank you for that.
Great work by Ashley LaValle Koenig with that interview, and thanks again to Shay Burnett with Counseling Alberta for coming onto the podcast this week. If you work in agriculture and want more information, visit agknow.com. That's agknow.com. That's it for this week. If you liked today's episode of the Everything Red Deer podcast, please share it on social media. See you next Friday. Thanks for listening.
This has been the Everything Red Deer podcast, powered by RD News Now. This podcast is produced and edited by the team at RD News Now and Pattison Media Red Deer. Make sure to download our mobile app and subscribe to our free daily newsletter by visiting rdnewsnow.com. Thanks for listening.